Welcome to the Insomnia Project. Sit back, relax, and listen as we have a conversation about the mundane. One thing that we can promise is that our conversation will be hopefully less than fascinating, so then you can just drift off. Thank you for joining us. We hope you will listen and sleep. I'm your host, Marco Timpano, and I am delighted to have a dear friend, Lucy Di Rosa, here on the podcast today.
Marco, I'm really excited to be talking with you. I've known you for so many years,
Yes.
and I'm a fan of the podcast, so I'm excited.
Lucy, you were one of our earliest fans, and you were such a proponent for our show that I'm kind of thrilled to be recording this. And for those of our listeners who listened to episode, I think it was 62, with Shane Jacobson, I had mentioned that I ran into him through a high school friend, which is you.
It is I.
So our listeners got connected to Shane because I got connected to him through you, and you guys were at TIFF watching a film that I did the translation for, the intro to, and it was all happenstance.
It was all happenstance, and I thought it was really funny when you said, I'm doing a translation, right? And I'm interpreting for a director at TIFF, and I, out of hundreds of films, said, is it Indivisible? Which I don't know if you thought that was strange, because out of all the hundreds of films, but I just happened to I already had tickets to see it, and I was so excited to see you working there that day, and then spending the day together was really fun.
And it's funny because you were in the audience, and I was nervous because of all the people that I didn't want to disappoint who were listening to me translate, and knowing that you're fluent in Italian, that you would pick out any mistakes I would do. You were the one who made me the most nervous to do the translation. But it all worked out great in the end.
It did work out.
And now we have you on our podcast. I want to mention that our listeners can follow you at your Twitter handle, which is a cool Twitter handle, which is Lucy BKLYN, which stands for Brooklyn, because that's where we are recording this particular episode.
That's where we are, and that's where I've lived for 16 years, even though I grew up in Toronto, where you usually work and where you live. We are in Brooklyn. Indeed, we are.
Very well. And what is it you love most about Brooklyn?
Well, Brooklyn itself is very, very large. It's much larger than Manhattan, and it's very diverse.
Right.
You can experience the ocean in Brooklyn. You can experience rivers. You can experience all kinds of ethnic foods and very different communities. It takes an hour or so by subway to get from where we are to the other end of Brooklyn. It's a whole world in and of itself, and I love it. And it's a little bit more, it's very lively, but it's a little bit more relaxed than Manhattan.
It feels a little more real.
Yeah.
I love Manhattan, don't get me wrong. So for our listeners in Manhattan, love New York City.
Yeah.
But there's something about Brooklyn that feels very real. And it's very palatable. And it's also now a very hip place to go and visit. And I'm happy to be here with you. So follow Lucy at Lucy BKLYN. And that's also your Instagram account.
It is, yes.
So we'll post a picture on the Instagram account of us. Lucy, we were talking about etymology, which is the origin of words, in a very loose sort of definition of it, or the origin of a word. So someone asked us, we were in a restaurant, and they said prego. Is it prego?
Oh yes, that's right.
Which is the way you say you're welcome. Mm-hmm. Or it's also the way you say, if you were to open a door for someone, if you please, or go ahead. So it doesn't translate to you're welcome. The etymology of the word is actually based on the verb to pray.
Right, pregare.
Pregare, prego, which also means I pray, but we use it as the you're welcome or pray you, like the Old English pray you. So that was an etymology lesson that you and I sort of told the waiter at a restaurant we were at. And I remember that I said, I want to talk to Lucy about etymology when we are on the podcast together. So are there any origins of words that you particularly love?
Yeah, okay, well, I can tell you in Italian, I can tell you that I love the word, and I don't know the etymology, and maybe people can tweet me about it, and I should know because I studied Italian, but there's an expression to say I don't know in Italian. In Italian, you say non lo so, I don't know. But there's an expression you can use, which is bo,
Right.
which I guess you can spell Boh. It's mainly more like a spoken thing.
Right.
It's not. And I find it fascinating. And it's 3 letters. It's 1 syllable. I don't know the etymology, but it's extremely expressive in Italian. And it can also convey certain feelings. Like it comes to me spontaneously sometimes, even like reading about social problems in our society. And the word that comes to me is bo. Like, I don't know.
I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
It's often followed by a shrug of the shoulders,
Yes.
I find, because I know when I say it, it's usually like with a shrugged shoulder. What's interesting is you said it's spelled B-O-H. I think the Italian spelling of it would be B-H-O. Like bo, like I have, right? You have that sound for bo, because in Italian, the H, which is a modifier that doesn't really make an H sound, modifies the O, and I think it would be spelled B-H-O, or am I wrong? Or in Italian, do they spell it B-O-H?
I don't know, but I think it's usually O-H, but you know what's interesting and raises a question in my mind about what you're bringing up is that if you've seen that somewhere, or if that's like a sense that you have about a possible spelling of the word, maybe there's something about the etymology in that.
Oh, that's a good deduction.
Like maybe, yeah, B apostrophe H-O, which
Right.
is I have.
You have.
Like
H-O, yeah,
H-O.
I have.
So that's really interesting. Well, we'll have to look that up.
I know the etymology of my last name, Timpano, means drum. Mm-hmm. And so for years as a child, my dad used to say to us, it's a Roman last name. And my dad comes from a small little town in southern Italy, so in Calabria. And so we always would joke and say, you just want it to be this ancient word, right? This old word from Rome. You want it, basically I said, you want it to have ties to Roman ties, just like everyone says, in a past life they were a prince or a princess or a queen. Everybody wants
Yes.
that, when in fact the majority of things would be very ordinary. So we would often roll our eyes when my dad would say that. So one day I went and looked up, how you can look up what your last name means. Mm-hmm. So I went to a place, and it was very legitimate. It was in a mall. You pay $5 and they print it out. So went there. I said, Timpano. They put it in. Prints out this card with a cool-looking crest of some sort. The first thing it says, of Roman origin, Timpano, drum. And supposedly my last name means that I come from a line of people who drummed into war. When you see those paintings of
Yes.
drummers, I guess, drumming the beat for the soldiers to march to. So either one of my ancestors was one of those people, clearly one of the first killed in the line of war, or was a maker of drums, or someone who made those drums. So that's the origin of my last name. So I always found that very...
Yeah, it's great. And I like the connection to performance. It's very much you. I think that's very appropriate. That's great.
And yet I don't play the drums.
Well, but you're a performer.
There you go. What's the origin of your last name?
Well, I just wonder, so my last name is Di Rosa, right? It's 2 words. Mm-hmm. So, I wonder, was Rosa a person? Was it a family? I don't know, but it's just of Rosa, of Rose.
Of Rose.
So, I don't know. My father, I come from a long line of like humble families in southern Italy, in Naples. I don't know specifically, but it means of Rose.
Of Rose.
Yeah.
Well, and you're lovely like a rose, so it makes total sense. The movie that I did the translation for was an Italian film, and I know that we both share love for film, and in particular Italian films. So I wanted to ask you, tell me about what brought you to Italian cinema.
Yeah, so when I was, I have a degree in Italian and English, a BA in Italian and English. And when I was sort of in the later years of my BA doing my Italian courses, I had a professor who later became my thesis supervisor when I did graduate work, who was a film professor. And she recommended that I take a film course in neorealism. And so I did. And I found the films in some ways really off-putting, and they're films that I had never seen before, and just and later I realized also really brave, because up until that point, you know, Italy was under fascism, and Mussolini really was in charge of the films and the content in ways that I think the industry still feels today.
Really?
In some ways, yeah. Like, for example, you know, he had to have all Italian content, so any foreign films that came in, he dubbed into Italian. And I think even today Italians are really like master dubbers into Italian, and you notice that a lot. It's much easier to see a foreign film that's been dubbed into Italian, whereas here, for example, we see things with subtitles.
Right.
I think it's still an influence of that era. But in any case, neorealism really struck me, because for the first time, directors kind of took their lives into their hands, and they put dark aspects of Italy on the screen. And at first, really, in fascism, the director I did my PhD thesis on, Luchino Visconti, he made a film that was released in the early 40s, you know, and it was basically, it was dark. It was showing an affair between a man and a woman, and the son of Mussolini, Vittorio, was at the first screening of this film, and he stood up outraged, saying, "This is not Italy."
Wow.
You know, and so it really was brave. And like Rossellini
What was the name of that film?
Yeah, so that was Ossessione.
Ossessione.
And it was actually based on The Postman Always Rings Twice.
Okay.
Yeah, and kind of like down and out, like characters with dirty T-shirts, and just Italians weren't used to seeing that.
Right.
And so it really was kind of a shocking thing.
And then you were saying something about Rossellini
Yeah,
before.
so he shot Rome Open City. He bought the film reels on the black market. He shot around rubble. You know, they were just doing things with no resources, nothing, at the end of the war, when Italy was just ruined. And they made art. It was incredible.
Rome Open City is one of my favorite films of all time. And it stars Anna Magnani, who is a fantastic Italian actor. And she is just so captivating on screen. But have you ever seen, there was a film with Christopher Walken that shows the making of Rome Open City?
I don't think I've seen that, Marco.
It's an Italian film, but Christopher Walken plays one of the American soldiers in it. And it's outstanding to see what they did to get that film made, because they filmed it during the German occupation of Europe.
Yeah, it's shocking.
It's shocking, because if you ever see that film and the content and what's happening in that film, and knowing that it's being filmed at the same time that these atrocities are happening, it's incredible. And so they would pilfer electricity from the Nazis while they were filming it. At night they would plug in. So if you get the chance to see, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of this movie of the week, I believe it was. But I'm sure if you look up Christopher Walken in Rome Open City, it'll give you a link to it. But definitely check it out.
Taste the Mediterranean at Whole Foods Market, with a vibrant selection that captures the flavors of the region. Shop coastal favorites like responsibly farmed whole bronzini and jumbo white shrimp, and pair them with specialty pastas, robust olive oils, and aromatic sauces directly sourced from the Mediterranean. Want a fast and easy dinner? Grab refreshing Greek salads and tortellini from the prepared foods department. Taste the Mediterranean now at Whole Foods Market.
Studies show that 100% of everybody in the world wants to curl up indoors and do nothing because it's so darn cold out there. That's why many people are turning to Bombas, whose pillowy plush slippers and warm merino wool socks have been said to be the most comfortable in the history of feet. Bombas products have been found to boost coziness by up to 1,000,000%. Okay, enough fake statistics, but could Bombas socks and slippers really be the cure? Go to bombas.com/audio and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO.
With almost 500,000 customers and over $1 trillion of secure payments, Bill isn't new to intelligent finance. It's the proven way to simplify bill pay and maximize cash flow. Want to learn more? Visit Bill.com/proven for a special offer.
But sorry, I don't mean to divert from what you were saying.
So that's how I got interested in it. And of course, that's such a specific sort of moment in time for Italian cinema, but I think it was a defining moment. And for me, neorealism was the doorway into sort of this love of Italian cinema. And then in graduate school, I became interested in, again, this director, Luchino Visconti. He was, first of all, he was a really interesting guy. He did a lot of theater when he was alive, and opera, and then he made feature films, and he loved literature.
Okay.
And and I was studying mainly literature, and he took many literary pieces from around the world, and many of his films are based on those, and that's what I wrote about in my thesis dissertation. And I think to an extent, I always liked movies. I remember, being 12 years old and sneaking away to the mall that was farther away. This is the era of like Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, right? And like going to the movies, and then all through high school, I'm dating myself, right?
Sure.
The Breakfast Club, the 80s. So I've always loved it, but I think seeing international cinema primarily through Italian cinema, and then kind of expanding out from there. That's kind of how it started.
So Italian cinema brought you to other foreign cinema? Would that be fair to say?
I would say that's probably fair, yeah. And whenever I'm asked, like, so who are your favorite directors? I am always a little bit like a deer in the headlights where it's like, oh no, I don't know. But, there's so many cool things by, like, Kurosawa just did like all kinds of really interesting and distinct work. And who else can I say? French film, I don't want to say I'm not a huge fan of, but I feel like I understand it a little bit less, and maybe I know it a little bit less. I mean, I like American cinema. I like independent films from all over the world. Yeah, it's really a variety. And I also really love documentaries.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of drama in a good documentary.
Sure.
Good storytelling, and it's very fascinating to me. But what about you, Marco? Tell me a little bit about your taste in cinema.
It's interesting because I've always had a love for the movies. And so I have this sort of, I love American films. I love the big budget, big blockbuster films. I like the sort of nitty-gritty, smaller, independent American film. And I've always loved that. And then I got into Italian cinema, and it opened up a huge door to other foreign cinema. And so I became a huge Almodovar fan.
Oh, yes.
And so I love his work from Women on the Verge of Nervous Breakdown, which I think is a hilarious, like some of his earlier work is just so hilarious, right?
Yeah,
and just
great.
Some of the things he does in those films, and his strong portrayal of women. I love seeing strong female characters in film, and hence Roma Città Aperta, or Rome Open City is one of my favorite films. But it when you get into foreign films, it really opens up the world to you. And as someone who loves to travel, and you can't be everywhere, but you can certainly be there when you're immersed in a film.
Yes.
And you can go back in time to, Rome of the 40s, or Paris of the 20s, or futuristic Spain, whatever the case may be. Love seeing those. I've really gotten into documentaries thanks to platforms like Netflix, that allow you to really see films that or documentaries that end up in the theater for such a short period of time that they're often gone, and you have to sort of find avenues to find it on television. But with platforms like Netflix and all those other online channels, or whatever you want to call it, it opens that up for you, and I end up seeing documentaries that I never thought I would want to see, or I would never think, that I just love.
Yeah, I agree. And if I may say, last week when we were at the Toronto Film Festival, one of the films that I saw was by Werner Herzog, who's a German, primarily documentary filmmaker. And wow, and it was about volcanoes.
Okay.
And it was so weird and quirky and also scary. You know, like he's standing at the mouth of an active volcano. He's talking to people who believe in the gods of the volcano. And then he went to North Korea, where there's a dormant volcano that's actually very important for the creation of North Korea 3 generations ago. And he was able to go down into the cities and see how this site of the volcano is kind of, it's central to like the imagery of the leader of North Korea of all 3 generations.
Wow.
Right? And just so quirky and interesting, and so many emotions, and also so much science and so much culture and sort of magic. And so that all comes from, you know, the volcano, which is, I guess it is exciting, but you wouldn't think of like the vastness of like the topics.
Right.
Anyway,
Like watching a whole film just on volcanoes seems
exactly
almost like what are you going to cover?
Exactly.
But then you sit there and you watch and you're like, wow, what a fascinating world I've been immersed in.
Yeah. Which is also in part down to the filmmaker, because he's really quirky and one of a kind. I think he's a really interesting guy and a pure artist. You know,
Sure.
he's a fearless person, and he pursues a story from really interesting and unusual angles, and it's really fun.
I once saw a documentary that had I don't want to say no narrative. It had no narration. It had no voice other than the raw emotion. So what they did was, during the World Cup, they filmed different people in different countries watching the final game. So it was Brazil, you saw a whole family watching the game. And I think it was I forget who was playing. I want to say Italy, Germany for the finals. Then they went to an Italian bar and they filmed it. And so the camera was at the perspective of where the television set would be.
Right.
So the camera was watching the people watch the film, and they would just cut between the different countries watching the film and their emotions as goals were being missed or goals were being scored. And in the final moment where one group of people are like just devastated and one group of people are celebrating. And it was a fantastic film with you watch the narrative by just watching the emotions. And what I loved in particular about that documentary was that it was one that everyone who watched it could appreciate, because it didn't require language for you to enjoy it. That's one of my favorite documentaries I've ever seen.
It's interesting. It also kind of can show one of the things. I'm not a huge sports fan, but I can get really into it because, again, there's like so much drama, and I think a film like that really shows it. It shows the humanity of the people responding to what's going on the field. That's really cool.
Let me ask you, what is the first film you recall seeing at the theater without your folks being there? So the first film you went to see with either a friend or
Yeah. So it's interesting because I really do distinctly remember in middle school going to Fairview Mall in Willowdale, Ontario.
There's no other place in the world.
And not remembering what any of those movies are. And I remember like it really like I didn't see any of these, but Animal House was playing there. And so, like, I don't remember. The one film that I do remember going to see the first time was For Your Eyes Only, the James Bond film. Yes.
I remember being at the movies when that was. I distinctly remember seeing the movie poster for that, but I was with my family when we were to go see something else. But the first film I ever saw was with my best friend, whose name happened to be Marco at the time. So Marco and Marco went to go see the Muppet movie.
Oh,
and
yes.
I was young. I know that his parents sort of just dropped us off and said they would pick us up. And I remember being really frightened to see a movie by myself as a kid, even though I was there with my best friend, because it was dark and we were alone and whatnot. But then once we sat and we watched the film, nothing else around us sort of mattered and we had a great time. But I distinctly remember that moment, and I'm wondering if it's a key moment in my life that brought me to love film, because it was so dramatic in a way.
Yeah, and it really is. And by the way, I think you were really, really young, because I remember being young when that came out. And you're a little bit younger than I am. So there is, I've really fallen out of the habit of going to the movies. Like last week, seeing movie after movie at the film festival was kind of an exception. I'm used to Netflix right now. I have so many other subscriptions to things. There is something so magical about sitting in the dark, staring at a big screen with other people and with strangers, right? And you're having this common experience together. I hope that as a society we can find a way to keep doing that. It seems like we are kind of moving a little bit away from that, but there is something magical about having that common experience in the dark with a group of people.
There's something about going to see a comedic film when the movie theater is packed and you're with all these people around you and everyone starts to laugh, and because laughter is so infectious, and there's just something so it makes the enjoyment of that film so much richer. And in fact, when we go see a comedy and the theater happens to be empty, the experience isn't as rich as when you are going to see a great comedy and the movie is packed.
Yes, I think some genres are like that. I think I'm not a huge fan of horror movies, but it's also the case for scary films, right?
Without
I think
a doubt.
The response to suspense, the response to the soundtrack, it just doesn't feel the same if you're experiencing it alone or if the theater is not full. It's definitely, there's something about that common experience.
So bringing it all the way back to the beginning and bringing it and wrapping things up here, in Italian, a horror film is called un giallo. Do you know why it's called that? Giallo means yellow in Italian, and that's what they call their horror films.
Yeah, it's giallo.
See, I don't know the origin.
I do know.
Okay.
I think there were, I don't know when, but in the old days, like even when I was a kid, 'cause it's more, giallo's more kind of linked to also like detective stories. There used to be like series, I'm pretty sure, like even when I was a kid, I was born in Italy, so when I was a kid I remember there were series of detective books and the covers were yellow. They were series and they were yellow.
Okay.
And so I think it actually comes from that, from the color of the covers of these
detective
genre books.
Thriller type.
Yeah.
And then it got translated, or it got carried over to horror
into
films. To films.
Like un film giallo,
Yeah. So does un film giallo, which means a yellow film, directly translated, does that mean a horror film or a mystery thriller?
It's more like which in English, at least for a period of time, we would call noir, right? I think it's more like that.
Oh, see, I always thought giallo was for horror film.
There might be in Italian, because there's also that kind of link to Dario Argento, who's like a master of horror in Italian. He's like the king of horror films. There is like a giallo aspect to his work, so I think maybe that's the association.
I see. Okay.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure that the origin of that term comes from this connection to these fiction series with yellow covers.
Fantastic. Well, Lucy, thank you so much. We end up at the end of our podcast going back to the beginning with etymology and Italian cinema. So I want to thank you for that. You can follow Lucy on Twitter at Lucy Brooklyn, but it's spelled BKLYN.
Yes.
So, Lucy, and you can find her on Instagram there as well. Lucy, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Marco. That was so much fun.
As always, the Insomnia Project is produced by Drumcast Productions, and this episode is recorded in Brooklyn, New York.